Anyway, so getting an invitation from the students is like that's the best possible position. So of course I'll come. Thanks so much for the invitation. I appreciate it. It's been a few years. Actually, it's been a couple of decades since I've been here. So I really appreciate it. It's great. Anyway, so I'm going to talk about big data. It's not about the data. It's not a mystery novel. So just to give you the heads up, it's not about the data. It's about the analytics. It's about making the data actionable. Okay? Data is cheap. It's easy to come by. But figuring out what to do with it, that's the problem. So it's what you all learning. That's the revolution. Big data is this term that the media invented, right? And all of a sudden, the world understood that this was a big thing, right? And I really like it. I'm really glad they did it, even though big data is not about the data. It's not even about the big. If you had a census, what would you do? You would take a sample, right? I mean, it's just like they got it completely wrong. And I still think it's terrific because now my mom thinks she knows what I do. And I hope it's the same with you guys. So just as an orientation, the data in big data, I'm a social scientist, so I'm going to focus on the data about people. In the last 50 years, there's the evidence base of the social sciences basically comes from three sources. From survey research, which is basically random collections of isolated people from unknown geographic locations, where you give them pop quizzes about subjects they may or may not have paid attention to. But yet, it's probably the most important data collection mechanism we have. Secondly, aggregate government statistics reported at the end of some period. I once hunted down the source of information about AIDS in Africa. You think about like, how are they actually counting these numbers? And I traced it all the way to the source, and the source was a guy named Allen in the World Health Organization. And he would get the data from the governments, and he'd look at it and he'd say, "Nah, that's not right." And he'd cross it off and he'd write the right one. And Allen actually was really good, so you would want his data rather than the original data. And then there was plenty of really creative but one-off studies of individual places, people, or events. And that's pretty much a summary of the social science evidence before what we're calling big data came in. In the next 50 years, and what we're seeing now, and what I think you're all participating in, is much more of the above, improved and expanded, et cetera. And then shrinking computers and the internet basically growing and data pouring out of everywhere. There is a march of quantification through fields of academia, the professions, government, commerce, pretty much everywhere. There's a replication movement, so not only does the world provide us data, but we provide it to each other. So Dataverse is a project we have that makes it easy to make data available. The AJPS, and I also learned international interactions, edited at this university, replicate all the articles that are accepted for publication, which is an awesome development. There's governments now that encourage data collection and experimentation. The Obama administration has released several executive orders requiring government agencies to actually make data open and available. There's massive advances in statistical methods, informatics, and software, which is really what's generating the results. The impact of all this is really big. Like, you are all part of something that is not only life-changing, but society-changing. You really need to understand this. This is a major movement in the history of the world, really. Okay? So it's pretty much changed all Fortune 500 companies, or a very large fraction of them. They've become basically data organizations. It's established whole new industries, altered friendship networks, which you follow on Facebook now, right? Political campaigns are completely different. Not as different as I wish they were, but but they're very different. Public health is a completely different thing. You have public health professionals saying that the most important innovation in public health, and then they hold up their cell phone, actually, because it provides information. Legal analysis is digitized. Policing is. Economics. Sports. We made it to sports. Have you seen the movie Moneyball? Go see the movie Moneyball. You'll basically be watching yourself. My students get offers now from like pro sports teams. Isn't that great? Public policy. Like we now, what is public policy? What is government? Government implements public policies. What are public policies? They're gigantic experiments with no control groups. Right? And governments actually get that. They actually have a sense that that's true, and so they understand that we can actually sometimes, under the right conditions, run a randomized experiment and not only implement something, but figure out the right way to do it so that you can actually make it better. I got to run a randomized experiment in Mexico in which we randomly assigned hospitals to communities. Literally, in my office, I flipped a coin. Heads, they built hospitals and brought in doctors and nurses and drugs and money to pay for it all. And tails, no health care for you. And how did this go through the institutional review board? Well, they were rolling out the program anyway, and they had to decide who was going to get it first, rather than second or third. And we convinced them that they should do this in the interest of learning about the program, rather than some guy in a basement just doing it. Anyway, side point. It's now used in the digital humanities or literature and lots of other fields. This is a major movement across academia, across the professions, across government, across industry, and you are all generating it. You are all doing this. This is a really big thing. However, the value in big data is not in the data, it's in the analytics. The data are easy to come by. It's a free byproduct of IT improvements. When MSU installs a new student information system, or a new air conditioning system, or a new finance system, it will come with an extra little spigot out from which will pour data. And all you need to do sometimes is hook up a little hose to that and do something with it. The data is becoming commoditized, which means it's becoming cheap or free. If you ignore it, and don't do anything about it, your institution, wherever you work or play or study, will have more data at the end of the year than at the beginning of the year. That's important, essential, but that's not the innovation. With a little bit of effort, of course, you can have huge data production increases. The value is in the analytics. You can produce output that is customized to exactly what you care about. Moore's law? The doubling of speed and power of computers every 18 months. It was a prediction that seems to be empirically true, or at least it has been for a while. That's an important thing. I mean, quite a lot of stuff that we do depends upon that. Thank you very much, whoever did that. But compare that to one good data scientist. That is to one of you, okay, who sits in your office for a couple of hours and produces an algorithm that's 1,000 times faster than the previous algorithm. That's not a surprise. That happens all the time. Think of how long more would have to take to catch up to you, right? No contest. Okay. There was a colleague at Harvard who was running an analysis of particular data that was pouring out of the world, and there was more and more data, and eventually there was more data than could fit in his computer. And so he called down to the IT shop that we have at the Institute for Quantitative Social Science that I run. And he asked them, how big a computer do I have to write a grant to apply for to keep running my analysis? And the answer was $2 million, right? That's a beefy grant, okay? It's possible to get a grant like that, but that's it's a big lift, right? So a couple of graduate students and I spent almost 2 hours working on an algorithm. And he now runs the analysis with much more data than he had even when this problem came up on his laptop, and it takes 20 minutes. Okay? And it wasn't the brilliance of us. It's like, you guys could have done this too. Right? Okay, so it's low cost. It's a little infrastructure. When I give this talk to businesses, I always say, it doesn't cost you very much. It's just human capital. And that's signals to the business that you just pay my students more money and you'll be okay. Okay. It's also, off-the-shelf analytics is way better than no analytics, but innovative analytics designed to the task can get you so much farther. It's really just a whole nother level. Okay. So, data is exciting, but it's really useless without the analytics, and I'm going to make that point with a few examples. So, a colleague of mine, Sidney Verbis, a political scientist in the audience may know him, wrote a very famous book with some colleagues on political activists. If you have a democracy, you have to have people who pursue office. Okay? It's important, right? So political scientists study political activists. And how do you study political activists? Well, they took a random sample of the public, 15,000 people, and they weeded it down to the 2,000 who were essentially political activists. asked them detailed questions, and wrote a very famous book on the subject. And that was great. Okay. And then, but then compare that to all the people writing in social media. Right? Today, there were 650 million people who wrote social media posts. 650 million. Quite a lot of them were writing about politics. And all that information was available. But what are you supposed to do with that information? Write it, print them out on index cards and put them in your office and read them all, right? Unless you have the analytics, unless you have the methods to analyze the text, there's no way you're going to make use of it. The innovation here is the analytics. How about exercise? The most used method of measuring how much you exercise is asking you the survey question, how many times did you exercise last week? Okay. But compare that to 500,000 people carrying cell phones with accelerometers in their pocket. Okay. And there's a huge difference there, right? It's all the energy that you expend over the week is the relevant variable, not the number of times you went to the gym, right? And got that big float on the way back, right? But what are you supposed to do with 500,000 traces of how much activity that you have? And how can you distinguish, by the way, the couch potato sitting on the train sleeping like this, right? Versus the athlete doing an all-out sprint on a stationary bike, right? How can you interpret the results? That's actually hard, right? So it requires some data analytics. Or take social contacts. In sociology and epidemiology and public health, they'll ask you, please name your 5 closest friends. And they'll ask you their first name so they can then ask other questions about it. That's not a very good measure of your social connections. However, we can now, if you get past the spooky privacy issues, have a continuous record of your phone calls and emails and text messages. The Bluetooth in your phone knows that there are other Bluetooth devices attached to people nearby. There's social media connections, address books. Think about this, right? There's an enormous amount of information, way more information. Social scientists are finally getting to the point where we have enough information to understand the subjects that we're studying. Or take economic development in developing countries, where you could use the end-of-year government statistics example that I gave you, where some government data is good and some government data is, well, it's the only data we have, so please don't bother me. That's basically the sentence that goes in the article. Now they have satellite images of human-generated light at night, or road networks, or other kinds of infrastructure, right? Massive, continuous time kinds of information. And lots more. So in every case, without the new analytics, the data are really a problem. They're really an annoyance, right? But with the analytics, we can make them actionable. So you should feel free to ask me questions, okay? You should yell out obscenities if that's what you want to do, whatever it is, okay? So now I'm going to tell you about how to read 1 trillion social media posts and classify deaths without physicians. Primarily I want to because I don't think any human being has ever said that sentence before. Okay? But what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you about 2 projects that are completely unrelated substantively, but methodologically they are. It's the kind of thing that you get to do if you do data science. You get to have a method